All right, look, it's not like we haven't been here before, but I feel like the last few years of basketball is really forcing us to really try to understand what we mean when we talk about value, right? This goes back, Mike, it goes back to Kobe, it goes back before then, going back to Wilt and Bill Russell and all of that. But really has come to a head, I feel like, in the last couple years between Russell Westbrook, James Harden, and Kyrie Irving, as recently as just, last week when they got bounced from the playoffs by the Bucks in five. We look at numbers and we look at certain things that really are supposed to indicate value in the players that we watch. And I'm really here to try to throw a little bit of a wrench in that because I feel like we've been looking at it wrong for a little while, and we have it now kind of being thrown in our face year after year. All right, so anyone who knows how I feel about basketball knows that I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of Kyrie Irving's game. I think he has the best handle of all time. He's got a top all-time layup package. But I feel like for Kyrie to operate and do the best things for Kyrie, he has to take his teams out of their offense, and I don't think that's the best thing. So you can't just talk about Kyrie without talking about the context that he plays in. The Boston Celtics obviously went to the Eastern Conference Finals without Kyrie last year. Obviously, playoff progression from one year to the next doesn't necessarily correlate, right? Like just because a team got to the Eastern Conference Finals last year does not mean that that same team would make it to the Eastern Conference Finals the next year, right? Obviously, the league changes. There are different teams in the conference, particularly in the East, obviously. Toronto loaded up, Milwaukee loaded up, Philly loaded up. It wasn't going to be the same path to the Eastern Conference Finals this year as it was last year. That being said, it still definitely feels like the team itself was worse, just in a vacuum. If you were to get a time machine and put the 2018 Celtics versus the 2019 Celtics, it seems like that 2018 team would be performing better. And while I don't want to get to anything where I'm attributing that to just one player, I do feel like the point guard, right? The point guard and the leader of the team has to take an outsized share of that blame. I feel like Kyrie Irving and the way that he approached the season was one of, if not the biggest issues with the team this year. So we saw it in a bunch of different ways, right? We saw it in the on-court play. Kyrie's always been a guy who's going to give you your points. And even this year, he added to that with, throwing in 6, 7 assists. Well, you say, oh, wow, like 25 and 6. That's exactly what I want for my point guard in 2019, right? Like it's not 1994, it's not 1987 anymore, where you're trying to get 10 points out of your point guard with, a dozen assists. That's not how the league works. You want your point guard to be able to score. Kyrie Irving does that. He threw you some assists in also. Everything's good, right? I don't think so. To really talk about what Kyrie did this year, you also have to talk about what the other guys didn't. And I think a lot of NBA fans look at it like, oh, well, Kyrie did his. He got his stuff done. He was supposed to get done. It's the other guy's job to get themselves going. I don't believe that, generally speaking. And I really don't believe that when it comes to this particular Boston Celtics team, because this team is filled with young players that are trying to establish themselves. And then obviously Kyrie and Gordon Hayward trying to reestablish themselves after injury. And in that scenario, it's not about this guy gets his, that guy gets his. When the leader of your team is also the point guard, it does fall on him, especially when he's a veteran compared to these young guys. It does fall on him to play in a way that's more conducive to his teammates actually growing and becoming the players that you want them to become. Right, so the Gordon Hayward thing, obviously I'm not going to hold Kyrie responsible for a man not being ready after injury. Hopefully he comes back strong next year. But when you look at Jason Tatum, when you look at Terry Rozier, when you look at Jaylen Brown, these are all three players that played extremely well last year when they actually had the opportunity to do that in the playoffs. These are all players that we all expected to take strides coming into this season that just passed, even with, quote-unquote, lesser roles for them. Everyone believed in Brad Stevens. He's going to be able to get it done. And ultimately, a lot of this falls on him. And just because I'm saying that a lot falls on Brad Stevens, it doesn't mean that Kyrie gets to skate off, because I feel like Kyrie was in a lot of ways the largest issue for Brad Stevens to have had to figure out. So if Brad failed, right, you do have to look at what he failed at. And I feel like what he failed at was the Kyrie Irving question. So Kyrie, he's giving you your points, and even this year he started giving you your assists, but it comes at a cost, right? For Kyrie Irving, his entire production comes when he pulls his teams out of his offense. I know that just sounds like a platitude. People say that kind of stuff, but it's the truth. When Kyrie's on the court, the Celtics throw 10% less passes, right? So even though Kyrie is going to give you, those few little assists that he gives you every night, that's standard for a point guard these days, it comes at the cost of team involvement. And for the Boston, I think this is bad in general, but for the Boston Celtics in particular, that's a killer. You have guys that are looking to grow in the league, and the way that you grow in the league is by getting reps, right? You have to have real agency on the court, and that comes when the ball moves organically. And when Kyrie comes into the game, that's just not what happens. Kyrie gets the ball, everyone stands around, he does his little thing, and he either shoots or he passes. And people think that because he throws that pass, well, now he's a facilitator. No. Facilitating offense is not about counting assists. You know, we've all seen the selfish assist where the guy is clearly looking to get an assist, like Rajon Rondo for the last 6 years comes to mind, right? It's not even about necessarily having the team run optimally as much as it is about being personally in control, and getting that assist is important. And I think that style of assisting and that style of facilitating is not what really leads to strong NBA offenses. And you see it all over, and you definitely saw it this year with Kyrie Irving. And we don't know what's going to happen in the offseason. You know, everyone speculates that Kyrie's going to be gone either to, you know, the Knicks, maybe the Clippers, the Lakers, you know, who knows. But I do think if he leaves Boston and Danny Ainge doesn't, you know, pull some other kind of stuff to really throw a wrench in the team, I think it's highly likely that next year you're going to see the jump in Tatum and Brown and Rozier that's going to have Boston still in the hunt for being a top Eastern Conference team. Assuming Hayward can come back and become, you know, some level of what he was before, I still like that team over a lot of teams in this league, including, you know, the fictional KD, Kyrie, Knicks team that people are trying to put together. I feel like a re-energized Boston Celtics team with agency for their young guys might still be better than that. And I think that's going to be a real black mark on Kyrie if that happens. But, you know, that remains to be seen. But for what has been seen right now, I do feel like it's really hard to argue that his style didn't clash completely with the idea of getting the young guys ready. And I think he's going to have to answer for that at some point. I also think that the things that he did in the media really went a long way to undermine the young guys too. And that stuff hurts. So, you know, Kyrie at one point came out and said that, yeah, like there is a rivalry between him and Terry Rozier, and that, you know, he felt like it was always going to be tough for the young guys to have to learn to take a step back. And to me, that's just completely misguided. Obviously, we've all played on basketball teams. The starter and the backup, there always is a rivalry. There's no doubt about that. But when you're the starter and you're an established all-star and your backup is a young guy trying to come up, I just don't feel like that needs to exist. Like, he doesn't need to feel threatened by that to the point where he needs to try to undermine this younger player in any way, on the court, off the court, however. That just shouldn't be a thing. And the idea that players need to take a step back instead of Kyrie needing to learn how to bring his guys along so that by the time the playoffs came around, they were the best they could be, the team was the best they could be, that's a misstep. Because we all know Kyrie, right? We all know that when the playoffs come around, he's the kind of guy who can give you that bucket, that shot creation in these high leverage moments that really matter in the playoffs. But if your entire style works against that for the first, 44 minutes of the game, it doesn't really matter what you do in the last few minutes because your team's already out of it. And I think that, Kyrie's going to have to learn how to operate in a way that doesn't do that, or go back and team up with someone else who can actually handle the day-to-day, minute-by-minute grind of the actual winning, like the meat and potatoes of the game, and let him take over in those moments. Because I feel like Kyrie, there's no question, is still one of the top weapons in the league for doing what he does. And what he does is extremely valuable. But it's only a weapon to use in moments. I don't think it's a sustained style of play that you can win with unless you happen to be playing alongside, the greatest player in the world who does all the other stuff. And I don't know if that guy exists anymore. And the last point about Kyrie, and honestly this applies to a couple other people we're going to get to later, is I feel like one of the real most toxic parts about this kind of play style is that it leads to production for the one player that looks so good on its face that it becomes really easy for the media, for the fans, and even for that player to look at situations like, oh, no, I'm doing my part, it's on the other guys. And I feel like that's not how anything works, right? There's only one ball on the court. There's only one game plan a team can run at a time. And when you're doing one thing, there's always other things that you're not doing. And so when Kyrie gets his, 25 points or whatever it is, there's those take possessions, right? And those possessions are not being used for someone else. And so to just say, oh, I got mine and you didn't get yours, it doesn't examine what it took for you to get yours. There's always going to be a cost for you to get yours. And some players, that cost is low. Other players, that cost is high. And I feel like Kyrie is a high cost player. For him to get his, it takes a lot of the team's resources to be able to do that, even if it looks to the naked eye like Kyrie's doing a lot of that himself. And I just don't think that's the case. And while we're talking about economics, there's also, a concept of comparative advantage. When two countries or companies or whatever are trying to produce something, even if it costs less for one of these companies to produce two different things, it still in a lot of cases makes more sense for that one company to use all of their resources to produce one thing really efficiently and let the other guy produce the other thing a little bit less efficiently, but you still get more overall by letting it happen that way. Which brings me to the godfather of this volume versus value discussion in today's NBA, Russell Westbrook. So for the last few years, Russell Westbrook has redefined what we even think about the value of production, right? Before 2017, no one had averaged a triple-double in the NBA since Oscar Robertson. Russell Westbrook has done it 3 straight times. And along with those 3 straight times of him having done that, we've also shown that we care less and less and less when that happens. Still in all, Russell Westbrook managed to get the 2017 MVP out of that, something that I didn't agree with at the time. I thought Kawhi was the MVP of 2017. If not Kawhi, then definitely Harden. But Russell Westbrook won it. But I think that it makes us have to examine like what we actually want in terms of value and what the cost of that production is. So I talked about comparative advantage, right? Russell Westbrook is the exact opposite of that as a player, right? Russell Westbrook is the I'm going to do it all kind of guy. And while, again, on the surface, that looks great, right? You always want a player with that high motor. Well, that's good. Regardless of surface, whatever, the high motor is 100% a good thing. I'm not gonna say anything bad about that. But I do think that with Westbrook, he has the idea that he's better than other people at doing things, so he needs to do these things. And if he sees an opportunity to affect the game in a particular way, he's going to try to do that. And while, again, like that mindset, I do think is generally good, and it's ultimately something that you want in your teammates, there is just the level of trust and agency that Russ does not show for his teammates that I think comes back to bite him time and time again, and never more than it did in 2017. So 2017, Westbrook won the MVP, in my opinion, from hijacking the team from otherwise, solid NBA players. The narrative of the 2017 Thunder for that entire season was, oh my God, like Russell is playing by himself. And when the playoffs came, I still remember, Reggie Miller and probably Chris Webber, yelling during the game, like, oh my God, he's all alone. And it's like, nah, that was never the case. That OKC team from 2017 had Victor Oladipo. It had Steven Adams. Robinson was running around. You had Taj Gibson. Like, you had guys who at the very least were solid NBA players, established NBA players that I feel like didn't get to play how they were meant to play that year. Russell Westbrook took complete control of the situation. Obviously, KD had just left. Billy Donovan and Sam Presti seemed like they were on board and signed this little devil's contract to let Russell Westbrook take control of the team in order to get, to keep him from leaving like Durant had just done. And I get that from an organization perspective, right? Like, you have to do what you have to do to keep your star happy. They let him do that, get the triple-double, get the MVP, throw him the bag. He's still there to this day. That's what you want. But the reality is that for that team, you can't separate the Thunder, supporting cast not being ready come playoff time with the way that they had to play the entire season. If your entire season is spent being a cheerleader and a spectator, well, then when it's time for you to actually have to do things, you're not going to be ready to do it. Again, this is the same thing that we saw with Kyrie. I feel like, preparedness and readiness was sacrificed to try to do things in moments, right? Westbrook was trying to win games in moments, which, again, I'm not going to fault him for trying to win games. But when you're faced with the opportunity to win in a way that feels familiar or win in a way that gives your teammates some level of agency, especially for a growing team, I feel like you have to kind of weigh that out. And there's value in Westbrook having had Oladipo take on more of a role and do more things that he wasn't used to at that point. And maybe by the time, April, May comes around, Oladipo is the same guy that he wound up being the next year, right? If they could have had that Oladipo on the Thunder, maybe they don't get bounced in the first round. And people say, it was the summer. No one gets that much better over a summer without there already being a foundation there. Oladipo had the foundation for being a great player when he was in OKC, and he just wasn't used in a way that allowed for that to shine. And at the end of the day, you can't just say that that's on him. Again, Westbrook as the point guard and leader, and I have to say again, the point guard of the team, it's on him to get the most out of his teammates. The response to that is going to be, Russell Westbrook led the league in assists that year. He's led the league in assists for the last 3 years. Westbrook himself said this about a month ago when he got bounced. I guess it hasn't been that long yet, but when he got bounced from the playoffs, and he said, the knock against me used to be that I was selfish, but then I led the league in assists for 3 years, so that went away. Nah, fam. That never went away. The Russell Westbrook assist has absolutely nothing to do with giving his teammates the ball in spots where they like it. We're giving his teammates the ball in places where they can create agency. I saw a stat. The Oklahoma City Thunder are last in the league in passes per game and have been last in the league for the last 3 years. The same 3 years where Russ has been leading the league in assists. So what that tells me is the same thing I said about Kyrie, the same thing I said about Rondo. The ball movement is not organic. Russ doesn't get off the ball and let his teammates actually do things. Now, he did some of that this year. Let me say all this with this caveat. This past season showed Russell Westbrook showing a lot more ability to cede some of this space on the court and allow other people to try to fill that up. And then you see that in a player like Paul George having an MVP level campaign. Again, in a player like Steven Adams stepping back up and reestablishing himself as one of the best big men in the game. And it fell apart at the end due to Paul George's shoulder injury than anything else. If George had gone into the playoffs healthy, if they had finished the season healthy, first of all, they wouldn't have been seeded so low. But they would have been better, they would have been better functioning by the time the playoffs come around. But instead, they were hurt and it went out. So let me say that I'm not just here to bash Russ. I think Russ is an amazing player, but I do think that his approach for these past 3 seasons, again, less so in this last season, but for the past 3 seasons, it has been selfish to the point of being a detriment to the team at the highest levels, right? Only at the highest levels. On its face, on the surface, he's getting you wins, and those are helpful. But when it comes time to beat good teams 4 times in 7 games, it can't be about one player doing everything. It doesn't matter who that player is. It can't be about one player doing everything. It has to be about the team actually functioning on a high level, players knowing what they're supposed to be able to do, and players know what they're able to do by being given chances to do things throughout the season. And when you take those chances away, you take away that level of preparedness, and you get what you get. You get first round exits. All right, now I think it's impossible to talk about Russell Westbrook this much without talking about James Harden, right? He's the other usage god of this era. He's an interesting case to look at this year because there's a couple different parts to it, or different like phases of the season that I think tell different tales, and I think is interesting. Obviously, Houston Rockets start off the season, they were in a funk, they were losing a lot of games. We're not going to talk about that one, right? When it gets interesting is when Harden decided, fuck it, I'm taking control of this season. I'm going to jump out there and do what I feel like it takes for my team to win. That's when he started taking a zillion shots a game, scoring 40 every damn night, not breaking Wilt's, but, matching up to the point where only he and Wilt can be even talked about as far as streaks, scoring 30 points a game. Again, even the old usage god, Kobe Bryant, had to come out and talk about, how he didn't feel like that style would win. And I feel like that's important, right? Kobe, who, was setting records for usage when he was playing with bums, recognized that, whether it's on him, whether it's on the teammates, the coaching, the front office, whatever it is, if your player is up that high in usage, it's not a sustainable path to winning. And, I didn't jump on Harden for all this because I feel like it was just a style that he felt like he needed to play in that moment because Chris Paul had gone down, Clint Capella had gone down, Eric Gordon was in and out of the lineup. So he was doing what he felt he needed to do to put his team in position to win night in, night out, and he got the wins to go along with it. So no hate whatsoever. But at the same time, we do have to examine how valuable that all really is. Obviously, at the top of the MVP race this year, you had James Harden, you had Giannis. Now, these two guys, as far as usage and volume and value, I think that they represent opposite sides of the spectrum. I'm going to get into guys like Giannis in part 2 of the video. But anyway, right, so we had the portion of Harden's year where he was taking control over everything and they were winning. At that time, you had a lot of people saying, well, he's just a regular season player. And while I don't necessarily agree with that, I do think that that particular style of doing everything and all these unassisted threes and all the ball stopping, I do think that that style just doesn't really work necessarily in the playoffs when teams have the time and the wherewithal to game plan against it. But I never thought they were actually going to run that, that exact same style in the playoffs, and I don't think they actually did. But speaking of the playoffs, I think this is an interesting thing. I'm talking right now. It is early May 2019. The Rockets were just eliminated by the Warriors just a couple of days ago. And while that elimination game was, that was like a standard Houston go home game, right? Like the standard things happened in one of those games. But I think that game 5 was way more interesting in terms of, what we value in our players, right? So just a little recap, because I don't know when people are going to be watching this. But down the stretch of game 5, this is after Durant, pulled up with his calf strain. The Warriors went on their runs. And down the stretch, James Harden only took one shot, right, in the last 8 minutes or something like that. And he got killed for it. Everyone on the morning shows and all the ex-players that, have their own shows like T-Mac or, whoever else is out there, they're all like, Harden needs to be more aggressive. He can't disappear in the fourth quarter and blah, blah, blah. And I'm thinking disappear. If you actually look at the stats, the Houston Rockets scored on all but 3 or 4 possessions in the last 8 minutes of the game. If you go to any coach and tell them, hey, down these last 8 minutes, you're going to score on all but 3, 4 possessions, they're going to do a backflip. That's incredible offense down the stretch. And all that we can think about as fans and as, analysts and commentators is how it doesn't personally look good for him to have played that way. And that's trash, right? If we're talking about actual value for a team, the value comes in the results. If me playing in a particular way leads my team to results, then what I was doing was valuable. Bottom line. It's not about what I think value looks like, right? People think value looks like a step back 3, or people think value looks like an assist or, something that shows up on the box score, but a lot of times it's not, right? A lot of times it is more valuable to, in a moment, dribble and take a trap and pull 2 defenders with you and swing it, right? That might not be an assist. That might not even be a hockey assist, but that sets up the team's offense. And when you have a player that garners so much attention, a lot of times that's the best way for them to use it. And just because we can't, place a number on that, we don't call it valuable. And just because, James Harden didn't put up some monster number of points in the fourth quarter, but his team did, we still see that as a problem. That's trash. That's honestly ridiculous. There's no way to look at a team functioning properly and try to find flaws in that. You can't do that. Now, obviously, they didn't win. So, obviously, some things are going wrong. But, you can look at the defense and at rebounding and find where those issues were. The issue wasn't in Houston's offense. Houston's offense was clicking, right? So, if the offense is clicking, how am I going to get mad at an offensive player only taking one shot when what he was doing or not doing was producing results, the results that you wanted? Makes no sense. So that's that. That's my take on these kinds of players. I think, subtraction by addition really gets to it. They're adding to what you're getting. They're adding production, but that production comes at a huge cost. And to me, it's not necessarily clear that production actually outweighs the cost. Or if it does, it doesn't outweigh the cost anywhere near as much as people like to actually think that they do. Guys like this shouldn't be winning MVPs, right? They shouldn't be taking control of teams. They shouldn't have the fans like bamboozled into thinking that they're more valuable than they are. And again, that's no hate like for their games. I love watching Kyrie Irving. I think Russ is incredible. But I think that there's a cap to what you can do if you put your team's resources into those players because they're not cheap players. So if you're paying $30 million a year for a guy who cuts away at what your team is capable of doing, you're putting a cap on how good your team can be. And there are players that you can get that can add a lot of that same productivity in other ways that cost way more and round out. But that's a topic, for if I'm going to be a GM, and I don't think anyone that's in the front office is going to be watching this video. So we're going to cut it right there. I am going to be back with part 2 of this video. It gets into the other side of the coin, right? If we have subtraction by addition, then there must be another side to that. So we're going to get into that. In the meantime, like, comment, subscribe. This is a brand new channel. I want to be getting into doing player breakdowns. I want to get into doing, especially in the playoffs, like game by game stuff, series by series breakdowns, which I got to get working on if I want to do that because there's only 3 more series left this year. But yeah, let me know what you guys think. Like I'm going to be in the comments. Leave a comment or two. I'll answer some questions, give my opinion on things. Obviously, it's just my opinion. Like, I'm not an NBA player. I don't have a job in a front office. I don't work at ESPN. But just want to get a little conversation going. So let me know what you guys think. All right.